Welcome to the Indian Film Festival of Cincinnati. I'm Rati Apana, the founder and director of the festival. Each year, we bring to you well-crafted films in the features, documentary, and shorts categories from South Asian filmmakers who are scattered across the globe. Today, we have with us a giant of a man with a giant of a film. He is director Ramesh Sharma of the film Ahimsa Gandhi, The Power of the Powerless. This impactful film will be a very hard act to follow. Ramesh Sharma, welcome to us today. Ramesh Sharma is a celebrated filmmaker from India, Emmy-nominated filmmaker, winner of 6 national awards and numerous international awards. He is an alumnus of Concordia University in Montreal, and his debut film, Ramtek, a monastery wreathed in 100,000 rainbows, won him the National Award in India and the Commonwealth Film and Television Award in Cyprus. He went on to make a path-breaking feature film, New Delhi Times, which is a political thriller. And this won him a lot of accolades around the world, including the Opera Prima in the Karlovy Vary International Film Festival, which was very prestigious. His feature documentary, The Journalist and the Jihadist, The Murder of Daniel Pearl, an HBO co-production, was premiered in the Tribeca Film Festival in New York and was nominated for 2 Emmys. And all of you will very well remember both the incident and the film. This, Mr. Sharma, was a very, very compelling film. Welcome to the Indian Film Festival of Cincinnati.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, this film, it explored the global impact of the Gandhian message of nonviolence and peaceful resistance. It was what brought India its independence, breaking the shackles of the colonial rulers. And this film featured interviews with renowned world-class scholars, with African-American activists, Martin Luther King. There were archival footages of Martin Luther King, interviews with John Lewis, interviews with the Dalai Lama. And then you also took us across the world, the fall of the Berlin Wall, Poland, Lech Walesa, and the influence that Gandhi had across. It was absolutely revolutionary in terms of how this movement inspired resistance across the world, and it does continue to affect us today. My question for you is, where were you when you first thought, I must make this film?
Yeah, well, I came from a position of where I was making films on violence. I had done a lot of films in 2000 in Afghanistan. I had done a film, in fact, called, I produced it. It was directed by a friend of mine, but I produced it and, wrote the script with him. It was called Taliban, Afghanistan, the Taliban Years and Beyond.
Mm-hmm.
And we were one of the first independent film unit that had walked into Kabul along with the Northern Alliance days after George Bush had begun his bombing of Afghanistan. Subsequently, I did another film called The Study of Militant Islam. It was called Jihad, the Sword of Islam. And then, of course, after a couple of other documentaries of various kinds around the same subject, I did a film, The Journalist and the Jihadi, The Murder of Daniel Pearl. And I began to realize that the world seems to be consumed with violence, that everybody has the first reaction to solving any problem, whether it is in India, whether it is in the USA, whether it is in Europe, was violence. Let us just attack, bomb, terrorism, And there was a sense of frustration that it is almost as if we are destroying ourselves. We are destroying the world. We are destroying, you know, when you look at it in terms of the environment that was happening, and we are destroying the moral compass of the entire human civilization. That's when I began to read Gandhi a little more. I said, there must have been somebody. And I thought to myself, because every year we celebrate Gandhi on the 2nd of October, his birth anniversary, on the 30th of January when he is shot dead. And everywhere I used to go, I used to visit many cities. When I went to Budapest, I went to Balatan, that lakes. There's a statue of Gandhi there. I'd go to London and find a statue of Gandhi there. I'd go to Washington, D.C., in front of the Indian embassy. There's a statue of Gandhi there. And I read about, statue of Gandhis almost everywhere. Then you read about the Arab Spring. And this young boy who's today, I think at the moment, studying in Harvard University, in the, I think in the John F. Kennedy University of Government, he talked about how Gandhi influenced the Arab Spring, the Tahrir Square demonstrations that he did. I read interviews of the Jasmine Spring, where this young girl was talking about the influence of Gandhi. And I thought to myself, my God, if Gandhi is being influenced by so many people, why don't I try and read a little more and see what exactly was the influence of Gandhi? And let's make a film on Gandhi. Now, there have been films made on Gandhi, and perhaps the ultimate film made on Gandhi was Richard Attenborough's Gandhi. Yeah. Which won, so many Oscar awards, and it was a feature film, and it almost became the ultimate. If you ever wanted to make a film on Gandhi, people would say, well, Richard Attenborough has done everything. What else can you do? That's when I began to think that, no, I'm not going to make a film on Gandhi. I'm going to make a film on the message of Gandhi, on the power of his message, and how it gave a power to the powerless. And that's when I began researching his various methods that he used. And I began to realize that there was a commonality in almost all the movements that took place that used nonviolence. I mean, Gandhi himself had told a group of African Americans who had come to India in 1935-36 that the power of nonviolence would be demonstrated to the world in its most glorious form by the African American civil rights movement. And he was right, because what happened with Martin Luther King, and Martin Luther King became the great exemplar. I mean, Martin Luther King always said that I go to other countries as a tourist, but when he came to India in 1959, he said, I came as a pilgrim. And I've used a lot of those quotes that he used, that he spoke when he came here. And I began to research, and I realized then the one person who represented Martin Luther King in terms of sheer spirit or the essence of what Gandhi was Congressman John Lewis, who was still alive then. And then of course you had the great Reverend James Lawson in LA. James Lawson was another man who lived in India. He came to Nagpur in 1954, and he studied the Gandhian movement. Because people think that Gandhi was a pacifist. He wasn't. He was a strategist. He used nonviolence not just as a form of resisting against something that is powerful against you, but actually making an inquiry into what is truth. Because he always believed that there is only one thing that can save humanity, that is love and truth and compassion. And his entire method is so inspirational that I think anybody who studies it, looks at it, from the perspective of what this man was, not just as as Churchill called a naked fakir or somebody with fads. He was not a perfect man. Gandhi was a human being. He had lots of flaws. There were lots of flaws, but in his writings, he has, 90 volumes he's written. Now imagine that, 90 volumes of writing. And, he had answers to almost every problem that we faced, to such an extent that he also believed that non-violence couldn't be just seen as a political thing against somebody's tyranny. It has to be seen also in terms of how you ravage the environment. He was a precocious
Mm.
environmentalist, one of the earliest environmentalists who believed that we are consuming too much, we are ravaging the earth, which is why he believed in sustainable models for the villages, you know. And
Mm.
that's when I began to research. And I said, okay, we cannot tell the story a normal way. I have to talk to it in terms of examples that have led people to use the Gandhian method and succeeded against all odds. And so I could have chosen many more, you know, sort of examples of Gandhi, but I chose 4 or 5 of the biggest examples. Number one, of course, is the India's freedom movement, which is probably the greatest example of what you might call a non-violent victory over a colonial power. Number two, of course, is the civil rights movement in America, which is still an ongoing movement, because Gandhi always said that non-violence doesn't give you the ultimate victory, because people change. You know, you may have somebody who's not a tyrant today, who becomes your friend today, and tomorrow power comes, power corrupts, he becomes a tyrant. And that's what's happening in America today. There is a reaction against, a backlash against Obama becoming a president. And so you're going to see a lot more of this fight for civil rights and voting rights and all that happening. Number three, of course, was the apartheid in South Africa. Now, Gandhi began his movements in South Africa. Yes. So Mandela, though for a while Mandela did use violence, but he realized afterwards when he was in prison, it would get him nowhere. Because if you use violence and your enemy is so powerful, they will crush you. What you need to do really is get into what is called the moral high ground, capture that imagination of the people. As Kerry Kennedy says in my film, that when the civil rights, the Selma March took place and all that, freedom riders took place and they were brutally beaten, people began to realize the conscience of Americans woke up. And the president found that he had the power now, at least the backing of a large section of the American people, to actually sign both the Civil Rights Bill and the Voting Rights Bills. And this is the same thing that happened in South Africa with the help of Martin Luther King, Mandela's incredible tenacity. He was in prison for 27 years, and violence was taking place in the slums of in the ghettos and the slums in the Soweto region. But there was no real violence from the political people. ANC had been banned, and he had ensured that there would be, in a way, a non-violent struggle of civil disobedience, which means, one of the things that I think Elizabeth King says in my film, Gandhi always said that people can impose their will on you as long as you let them do it. If the people say no, I will not let it do. No power, no tyranny, no government can last. And that is why he did boycotts. That's what he did with the Salt March. He believed very strongly that if the people got together and said, I am not going to cooperate with you, I am not going to go to work and work, what I think is an illegal act. The government can do nothing. Yes, they can open fire, they can kill people, but it's going to work in your favor then, because a larger mass are going to get more and more excited. The same thing happened with Lech Walesa. Lech Walesa says that I was facing Soviet Union, which was a nuclear power, which had few million troops.
Everything.
All we believed in was strikes. We said, no, the day we begin violence, that is the end of our struggle. And so they go to prison, they are put in there, they come out, but they go on strike again. And then, of course, the greatest man in, I think, the 20th century at that time, Václav Havel. Havel was a playwright, and he was in prison for longer term than even Gandhi was. And yet the man believed that the only way to do it, and they were a very small group of dissidents at that time. There were about 2,000-3,000 people only. But they realized that, the power of that was so strong, because the undercurrent, there was no support for the government. The communists didn't have the support.
Yeah.
So all you needed was one incident that could trigger the people. And that incident happened when this young boy, during one of those demonstrations died. And then suddenly all of then Czechoslovakia came together.
Yeah.
And they began to realize it became unbearable. They couldn't rule it any longer. And of course, you find Havel becoming the president. This was the power of the Velvet Revolution, the greatest form, and not just Velvet Revolution went right across, because you saw about 100 million people becoming free from the shackles of communism. A certain kind of liberal democracy started growing. Now, another matter, that all these countries are moving towards the right again. The danger of that is again coming in. So, which is what Gandhi always said. This is a work that you need to keep on battling every time.
Oh, that's a very important message. Yes, indeed, you're right. We are slowly, you see the world slowly moving to the right. So Absolutely. This is the best time for this message to get out and for everyone to see it. I really thought it was very powerful how you, took that message and were able to display to us the effects it had in what you call the Velvet Revolution. So is there hope for our world, in your opinion, Ramesh?
Well, in my opinion, the hope will only last for the younger generation. I think that is a generation that really will, because we find that today in somebody like Greta Thunberg, when she's fighting for climate change, she's, a young girl. You find it in Malala, and she's fighting against terrorism, for education for the women. You fight it in the young boys in Portland High after the shootout, when the killing that took place, and they marched to the congressman and took them on. Mm-hmm. It is that passion, that kind of commitment, that is going to be the hope. The hope is not going to come from our generation. It's not going to come from Joe Biden. Biden is as good or as bad as any American president or any ruler in the world. They are only interested in their own thing. They will, at a drop of a hat, they're willing to bring drones and kill people. I mean, Obama may have won the Nobel Peace Prize, but I'm sorry, he used the maximum number of drones to attack at civilians and kill the number of civilians. He should be ashamed of himself in that sense. Well, he's a great man. Of course, he took America out of some, what I call the agony of their own, problem, their existential problem with people like Dick Cheney and George Bush. So in comparison to them, he became a saint. But these are not people who have any real commitment. Though he says he has a commitment to Gandhi, and in one of his interviews, he even said that, if I were to invite one person I'd like to have a lunch or dinner with from history, it would be Gandhi. It would be a frugal lunch. But the truth of the matter remains, they don't walk the talk.
They don't walk.
They don't really do. Once you're in politics of the kind that you have today, you're basically always going for the easy solution. Britain has created a mess. Colonialism. I mean, the world is watching, actually trying to pick, the shreds and the debris of what was created by a colonial exploitation.
Correct.
What happened in India, is that we were ravaged, we were pillaged by the British colonialists and the French and the Portuguese. They all came here and took away a massive amount of our wealth. That is never told to the American people. That is never told to the British people, never told to the Portuguese. They were only, the sun never set in the thing, and we were the jewel in the crown. But the people suffered. Thousands of people died of famine. There were no infrastructure that was built. Oh, the railway, the British built the railway, we are told, but the railway was built for British economy so that goods could be then transported easier to Britain, and this is what has caused the world to become such a disturbing place. It's happening in Africa. You look at what happened in Rwanda, the entire massacre that took place of the Tutsi and all. Who was responsible for it? The Belgians and the French. And in fact, Macron, only 2 months ago, he apologized to the Rwandan people for the role that France played in that massacre. So I think, we have to look at the world in a manner today where it is so dangerous. I'm not saying that the Russians are any good or the Chinese are not, every one of them to be blamed. It is this political leadership which, unless and until they get committed to a world of compassion and empathy, what Gandhi believed, the talisman. I mean, he always said that your policy should only impact the last man standing. If you can remove the tears from the eyes of the person who most deserves it, you have succeeded. But that is never the case. I mean, I just think that one rocket that they launch, even like people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and Branson, and everybody's amazingly praising them for being such great pioneers of taking themselves in space. One of that, one spacecraft that he sent, Bezos or Elon Musk or Jim Branson, can feed billions of people abroad, millions, educate millions. I mean, why can't they do that?
But that empathy is not there, and there's no glory in it, maybe.
Absolutely. That's what you got it right. That's what you need. You need policies with empathy. Nobody says science shouldn't progress. Nobody says you shouldn't have allocation for research, and but the poor don't need poor solutions. You need to have technology to be used. Technology can be used to harness online education to the remotest villages. It can be used for medicines, telemedicines, in such a manner that poor who don't have anything can get it. It must be used to give water, drinking water, which is not available. It must be used to give toilets. Give human dignity. If you don't have that, then you create resentment. Then when you have, you start giving out aid to them, then you create what is called a sense of victimhood by the privileged class. They feel, oh, there is a sense of appeasement that is taking place, which is what is happening in America today. Oh, we are giving so much affirmative action to the blacks. We are doing this to them. There's a certain sense that we are being threatened. We are a minority. We're going to be disappearing from the face of the earth. And so therefore begins that Donald Trump's, message of taking people from sort of what I call creating anarchy, spreading rumors, spreading half-truths, conspiracy theories, and democracy becomes the biggest victim to all this. And so therefore Gandhi's message becomes so important in this whole context that without it, I think the world today, I mean, like Martin Luther King says in my film, the choice is not between violence or non-violence. The choice is between non-violence and non-existence.
Yes, that was so well said. Ramesh, what are your hopes for this film?
Well, my hope is that I can show this film to everybody as I can, especially the university students. I want to use this. Listen, I don't have answers in the film. I have only shown examples. Probably there are many, many debates you can have on it. Probably there'll be, messages that you can sort of debate and find out where it goes wrong, why it can't work. But that's a debate you need. You need an engagement. And I want to use this film in classrooms, in seminar halls, in think tanks. They watch it and they discuss it. They discuss what the message is, whether it's good or bad. I don't want everybody to praise my film and say, oh my God, you got all the answers. I have no answers. I have only presented a particular view. Now let us discuss the view. I think it's a rational view. I think it's a good view. I think it's a better view than most people have. I think it's a view that can counter Dr. Strangelove, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, that is what it is.
It is. It is a view.
Therefore, I want to just
go ahead.
I want the world to, I want the largest catchment area to see this film. In fact, I'm trying to bring out a companion book for this film because there are a lot of interviews I have with John Lewis and other great men, Rajmohan Gandhi, and people who've spoken so much more, which you cannot put in the film. which I want to basically make it as a companion book. So if there's ever an argument, debate, or discussion, that could become a textbook to refer to.
Oh, I think that's a fabulous idea. I do think it would be, you were talking about the view, and this is a timeless view, really, that you have presented, and it's for all time, for folks to look at this. I had I think the editing was excellent. You had a very good editor.
I had a very good editor, Yamini Upadhyay, a brilliant editor. I had a brilliant cameraman. They all made the film. I have, my wife and daughter who were producers of the film. I mean, we all worked for the passion of the film. None of us worked at what you call Hollywood rates. I'd never be able to make the film. We traveled all over the world making it. As you can see, it's not that, I didn't want to do Zoom interviews and to coordinate between somebody who's in Rochester, who's in New Haven, in London, in New York, in Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles, and then Prague, and then, Gdansk in Poland and in London, and then, of course, all over India. That took quite a thing,
It was,
It needed money. To raise the money was a problem, but we managed it. I mean, we've, sort of gone ahead and done it, and let's see. You just have to wish her our best and hope that festivals like yours would give us,
Yeah, we are so happy to get the word out. I had a last question about the music in the show as well. You had some very tall players in the industry. You had U2 and you had A.R. Rahman.
Yes.
Who wrote the lyrics for it? Was that something you did? Or
that was it? No. That was A.R. Rahman and Bono. They did. It was a very strange coincidence. I had just finished the film, and my end actually was a Rabindranath's film, a song, which is my favorite song, which is Agoner Poroshmani, which is one of the greatest poems that he has written, which basically exemplifies Gandhi to the world. And I heard the song Ahimsa, which had just been released by A.R. Rahman and Bono. And I couldn't afford it because they asked for something like about $100,000 for using 30 seconds. So fortunately for me, my distributor, Anand Singh, had produced Mandela Walk to Freedom, Long Walk to Freedom. And Bono had written the song for that. So he got in touch with Bono and sent him the film. Bono loved the film. And he said, okay, so I got it for a nominal fee, and we used it. And it was one of those serendipity, kind of just happened. And what was amazing was that his song was called Ahimsa and my film was called Ahimsa. And we came from.
I was going to ask you about that. So that was a beautiful touch. Yeah, that was very nice.
And then the other songs that we used, obviously we paid for it. We licensed it from various people. I mean, licensing is a very big thing. Songs and archival material, photographs, they really, and we took a lot of it from the Library of Congress, from things that were in public domain. So I had a very good researcher in Washington, D.C. She helped a lot. I had a researcher in New York. I had a researcher in London. I mean, these films are made with a team. Filmmaking is a partnership. I cannot take credit for all of it. All I can take credit for is probably the tenacity with which I ensured the film got completed.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this was such a giant of a film, and your hard work really shows through it. Your talent really shows through it, and I'm very hopeful for this film, and I want to wish you all the luck. Hopefully, everyone here in the U.S. would see this film because it touches a chord with all.
I hope so too.
Yes, it touches a chord with all.
I hope so.
And I do hope every Indian also watches it with great pride, because
I also hope so. You're absolutely right. That is my hope too. That's when you make a film. You make a film hoping that your own countrymen will watch it and hoping that the message of it will resonate around the world.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for being here with us, Mr. Sharma. It was a pleasure talking to you
Thank you.
and listening to you about the film. I urge everyone to go to the theaters, watch it. This is a film that is absolutely unforgettable. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And thank you again, Mr. Sharma.
All the best. Thank you very much, and all the best for your festival.
Thank you.